Hey everyone! Welcome to my channel, where we dive into the world of books and novels. If you're new here, pause the video, go to my channel, and watch the first part of Jumana novel so you can understand the story. This is the second part, called Ababil. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on new content. Let's get started. Dive into the video. When it got very late and the sun was about to rise, and Jamina had not returned to life, the white owl, seeming to tire of waiting, said, "You should go back home, boy." In fact, yes, he should return home before Ire woke up from her sleep and discovered his absence. The child, who showed clear signs of sadness and exhaustion, said, "I must have made a mistake." "What do you mean? My mother doesn't lie. She always insisted that he answers every prayer." Then he added, "I asked him to bring her back to life, but he didn't do it. I must have made a mistake somehow." Ire was waiting for him when he returned home, standing at the door holding a wooden cane in her hand. "How did you get out with your room door locked?" He didn't know how to answer, so he said, "I jumped out of the window." "Impossible. You're bigger than your window frame." Since he knew she wouldn't believe him if he told her the truth, he remained silent. "You're not going to speak, are you?" she asked impatiently. "I told you, I went out through the window. And are you lying again?" She said this and began to hit him hard with the cane, as if he were a rat she caught in her kitchen stealing a piece of cheese. He didn't mind the blows Ire rained down on him. He was thinking of something else, the reason why his prayer had not been answered. Later, he lay down on the floor of his room, indifferent to the numerous wounds Ire had inflicted on his face and various parts of his body. He was lost in thought about the same issue. After much contemplation and considering many possibilities, he finally was convinced of only one answer. "Because God didn't hear me at all," he said to himself, then added, "I called him with my heart while he is in the distant sky. I should have raised my voice higher so that my prayer would reach him." He remembered now the story of the ant, Jarsa, when she spoke in her low voice, ordering the other ants to quickly hide so that Prophet Solomon and his soldiers wouldn't crush them unknowingly. He specifically remembered asking his mother on that day how the prophet could hear the little ant's voice. She answered him that the wind carried the ant's sound. Therefore, he snuck to the roof of the house, climbing the wall with the speed of a monkey, steadied his feet on the edge, raised his head towards the sky, then cupped his hands around his mouth, using them as a megaphone, and shouted at the top of his lungs, allowing the winds to carry his prayers to God. "Bring my mother back, O Lord, bring her back to life." Using his unique strength, he managed to escape the house despite the many precautions the witch Ire had set to prevent him from doing so. He ran toward the cemetery at an incredible speed, certain that God would answer his prayer this time and that his mother would rise from her grave. When that happened, he would brush off the dust and dirt from her, hug her tightly, and tell her that he agreed to go alone to Grandpa Nuffle to learn from him science and knowledge, just like she had wanted him to do before. Just as he was running toward the cemetery, the white owl approached him and flew alongside his head. "You're back again, boy. Where are you going this time?" "To meet my mother. Didn't you learn a lesson from last night?" "I recognize the mistake," he confidently replied. "What mistake?" "I'll explain to you there." When he arrived, he didn't find his mother waiting for him as he had expected, so he decided to sit near her grave, hoping she would return at any moment. He waited this time longer than he did the previous night, and when he felt that nothing was going to happen, he stood up and dusted off his clothes, saying, "It seems that the heavens are not answering." The sadness returned to him, and he walked home with heavy steps, his mind preoccupied with the reason why his prayer had not been answered this time. The white owl didn't want to leave him in this state of sadness, so she flapped her wings and followed him. "You will meet her in paradise." "I'm no longer sure," he said. "I'm no longer sure that there is a paradise at all." "Why do you say that?" His chin trembled as he spoke in a voice close to tears. "If God is truly in the sky, then why didn't he answer my prayer?" Before the white owl could comment, he said, "Leave me be." Then he ran away from her. He found Ire waiting for him again at the door, moving her jaw like a camel chewing its cud. It seemed she had been holding back a spit in her mouth since the moment she discovered his absence from the home. When she saw him coming from afar, she cleared her throat with a sound resembling a cow's moo to ensure she would gather all the dirt from her mouth in her next projectile. As he approached her, she spat in his face and began to hit him with her hands and feet. Meanwhile, he took the punches and kicks while repeating to himself, "If he were in the heavens, he would answer my prayer." After half an hour, Ire stopped hitting him, but not out of pity. It was simply because she found no new spot to strike him. She spat on him once more as if to punctuate the end of a sentence, then then left. As for him, he got up from his spot and walked to his room, blood streaming down his face. He squatted in one corner of his room, silent and deep in thought, searching for answers justifying why God hadn't answered his prayer. Ultimately, he reached one final conclusion. There is no such thing as God, he muttered under his breath. As days went by without him feeling any significant change in his life, he grew more convinced of the absence of God. He even thought to himself once, while looking at the clear sky through the glass of his room's window, "If you were there, you would have punished me for abandoning you." And because hearts die when they lose the thin thread that connects them to the heavens, his heart died even though it still beat with life. His mood changed, and he began to feel a monstrous anger growing within him. His left eye turned red as blood, and he felt an intense desire to hurt someone. He went to the room where the witch slept, tried to open her door, but it was locked with a latch since Ire was the kind of person who couldn't fall asleep without ensuring she was in a closed space. He wasn't sure he could use his crossing skill at that moment, but nevertheless, he stepped back and let his feet push him toward the door. The room was dark inside, and a steady snoring sound came from above the bed. He pulled aside the curtains to let the moonlight in, then advanced until he grew closer to Ire. With every step he took, he felt his body become stiffer and more rigid, as if iron rods were swimming within the veins of his hands. His body was hot, breathing heavily, trembling violently in his extremities. He was sweating abnormally and feeling sharp pain due to the strange thing happening to him. It wasn't long before he looked at his hands, aided by the faint moonlight coming from the room's window, and saw the wounds starting to crack little by little at the tips of his fingers, the sharp, black claws piercing through the flesh and growing outward. He felt neither fear nor strangeness as he watched his hands gradually transform into those of a mythical beast. It felt as if the change that had occurred in him was entirely normal. He spoke in a voice different from his usual one, leaning in with one claw to poke Ire's body. "You," then added in a whisper, "wake up." Ire opened her eyes, surprised by his presence in front of her. She attempted to use her magic to defend herself, but he didn't give her a chance to cast a spell against him. He surprised her by plunging his claws into her chest with force, driving his hand deep into the layers of fat and flesh until he reached her heart. He found it fun. That's how it felt as he extracted her heart from behind her ribcage, watching the pulsing red mass in his hand for a moment before it gradually weakened and finally stopped on its own. What was even more enjoyable for him was when he tasted the flavor of her heart with the tip of his tongue, finding it delicious, appetizing, and fit for consumption. He dashed with all his speed toward the dark forest, angrily making his way toward the Emperor's castle, trampling over the sanctity of the dark forest, something that Tara would never have allowed if it weren't for the fact that the boy was the son of her dearest friend. He shouted when he reached the castle, "Taj, show yourself." Since he received no reply to his call, he yelled again, louder this time, "Where are you, Taj?" Taj opened the window on the second floor and saw him standing in front of the castle. From her position, she could distinguish the fresh blood wafting strongly from the claws of his hand. "Are you coming down, or shall I come up to you?" "I will come down." She descended to him as he had asked and deliberately stood a little distance away, so she could avoid his attack if he decided to strike her. Then, in an attempt to diffuse his anger, she said, "I warned your mother," advising her not to try to uncover the truth. "Enough." He interrupted her sharply, saying, "I don't want to hear anything from you." "Then why did you come if you don't want to hear anything from me?" "To kill you." Then, in the blink of an eye, his left eye turned a deep red, and he lunged towards her, brandishing his sharp, hooked claws, trying to hit her anywhere on her body. However, she managed to evade that strike at the last moment, saying, "Will my death make you feel satisfied?" He didn't speak but turned around and jumped at her, attempting to strike her for the second time. Again, she was able to sidestep this attack. "You won't gain anything by killing me. It won't bring your mother back. Why won't you face me? Are you really that afraid and helpless?" She knew that at that moment, he was like a wounded beast wanting to destroy anything in his path because a wound was bleeding profusely from his body. She also understood that wisdom in such situations required patience and making the right decisions. Although she didn't have a clear plan to deal with his anger, she would try to buy some time until he calmed down on his own. She said, "I offered her protection, but she asked me to stay away from you." Without allowing her to finish her sentence, he cut her off. "I told you I don't want to hear anything. If only you'd listen to me, I could do you a favor you won't forget forget by revealing the truth, she said calmly while focusing her gaze into his eyes. If you want to do me a favor I won't forget, then stop running away. He made a third attack against her, but this time she didn't flee. She stood her ground as he had asked. Just before his claws sank into her chest, she extended her hand and grabbed his wrist, looking at him seriously and saying, "I was the one who taught you to use this power, boy. Do you really think I can't stop you? It's not enough to just stop me," he said while trying to free his hand from her grip. "You need to get rid of me because if you don't, I will kill you one day. A brave person does not fight when there's a chance for peace. Save your advice for yourself," he shouted at her, then aimed a strike with his other hand's claws. But she had anticipated that move and managed to catch his other wrist before he succeeded in landing the blow on her body. She said, "Your mother asked me to stay away so that your father wouldn't know she was a fairy." "My mother is not a fairy." "Then where do you get all this power from? And how could you speak to the donkeys at that stable if your mother isn't a fairy, you fool? How did you know about the donkeys?" he asked in astonishment. "That white owl," she said coldly, "was me." "It's not nice to fool others," he protested. "I didn't fool you," she said, still holding his hands, and then added, "I should have been by your side when you were in that state. You are my grandson, and I won't stand by and watch you hurt yourself without trying to help you." He kept trying to free his claws from her grasp, but it was useless. She held them tightly with a grip of steel, not allowing him to move them even slightly. He had to think of another way to attack if he really wanted to achieve what he came for. "You turned me into a monster. If your mother weren't a fairy, I wouldn't have been able to unleash the power inside you." He opened his mouth in surprise as 4 saber-like fangs sprouted from his mouth. He tried to drive them into her neck, but she struck him with her head in the face to push him away from her. She said, "Let me confess something to you," she gasped. "You are stronger than I thought, and I don't believe I can evade your attacks for much longer, so you better listen to me politely, or I will have to retaliate with an attack you won't survive." Of course, she was lying. She couldn't hurt him, not because she was his grandmother, but because she knew Tara was hiding behind a tree at that moment, watching what was happening, and she wouldn't let her harm him. He wiped a streak of blood that began to flow from his nose with the back of his hand. He had no intention of backing down or surrendering, but he thought at the same time that he wouldn't lose anything by listening to what Taj wanted to tell him. "Let your last words be sincere," he said disdainfully. Taj swallowed that insult and said, "Your mother came to visit me one night. She asked me for help in uncovering the truth. She told me that her heart could no longer bear anymore. She wanted to know why your father had been disappearing from her for so long. As for me, I couldn't refuse her request. She's my daughter after all, and I wanted to do anything to improve my relationship with her. I immediately went to investigate, but I never imagined I would uncover that truth." Her chin began to tremble with emotion as she continued speaking. "The next day, I came to warn her, but she wouldn't listen to me," he repeated in a low voice, as if he was starting to connect the dots. "She wouldn't listen to you? Didn't she tell you to look for your father?" He replied, remembering. "She told me to find him even if he was hiding underground," she said while recalling her memories. "A long time ago, your father was a sea creature working for a large organization called the Aljatham, whose mission was to cause destruction and chaos throughout the Ababil kingdom. Your father was one of the key leaders of that organization. However, he permanently retired from them when he met your mother, Jumana, and fell in love with her." She fell silent, but his eyes asked, "What happened next?" "The two got married and lived for many years in peace and security, to the extent that your father believed the Aljatham organization had moved on and forgotten about him. But he was certainly mistaken, for when your mother became pregnant with you, the leader of the organization, the Elephant Tusk, came in person to visit your father." That name caught his attention, so he asked, "The Elephant Tusk? He is the leader of the Aljatham organization. What did he want?" "The organization needed the sea creature, and the Elephant Tusk came to retrieve him for their ranks." "Did he agree?" "At first, he didn't agree, but the Elephant Tusk threatened to kill his wife and the child she was carrying." "Who was you? And what did Bar do then?" He knew that the Elephant Tusk didn't make idle threats, and that he was one of those people who meant what they said. Therefore, he decided to strike a deal with him. To make the deal more serious, they brought a basin filled with blood, dipped their hands in it, and made a pact. "A pact for what?" "That your father would return to work with him, in exchange for which the Elephant Tusk promised to leave you and your mother to live in peace. They called the pact the Blood Covenant," he concluded. "So Bar's absence from home was to protect me and my mother." She nodded sadly, then added, "The Elephant Tusk knew that nothing corrupts the hearts of his men more than love. So he placed that enchanting girl named Ire in a house with your father to monitor his movements and ordered her to kill you and your mother in 3 cases. 3 cases? Yes. Either Bar stops working with the organization, or he decides to visit his family for any reason, or his wife tries to uncover the truth. Therefore, the moment your mother sent you to look for your father, that was was the moment the elephant tusk sentenced you both to death. But you, child, miraculously survived. He growled with anger. The elephant tusk? Yes, that's the name of the person who killed your mother and tried to kill you. Then Taj dared to approach him and said, and now look into my eyes and repeat his name again. He looked into her eyes as she requested and repeated, the elephant tusk? That's why I took care of you and trained you, she admitted. Promise me you'll take revenge for her. Promise me you will avenge your mother Jumana's death. I promise you that, he said with hatred. She removed her hands from his head and whispered, are you ready now to hear the other half of the truth? There's still another half. Taj said something frightening. The truth regarding you hasn't even begun yet, boy. The plan was, she didn't know how to explain the upcoming topic. She was about to reveal to him about the witch's plot to kill his mother, and what made it more difficult was that she would tell her grandson that unintentionally he had been an important part in the success of that plan. She said, Ire knew very well the customs of the people of the village of Al-Jassasa, boy, so she didn't put much effort into getting rid of your mother. She slipped poison into a small brown water jar and a white food dish and left them at the threshold of the house before departing without anyone seeing her. And it seems that when you saw that food dish in the jar, you mistakenly thought that one of your mother's neighbors had left them there for you too. So you brought them inside the house. Am I right? He was silent. He recalled the last night he spent with his mother, and disaster began to show on his face. That night, my mother asked me to bring her a glass of water. And what happened? She asked. And what happened? Continue. I poured her the water from that poison jar.